Yeah, so this, and thanks first of all for hosting your. One of the biggest challenges that I see is just, when people are talking about AI instrumentation in the enterprise, it's something that everybody wants to vibe code. They want to use Claude Code and desktop, and every week it seems there's something new coming out. But there's a couple of things that you need to kind of keep in mind. One is it needs to be bounded. Whenever you introduce tools, things like that, if you want to get value from it, it also needs to be reviewable so that you can trace and see what's being doing, the same as what we do with typical security practice, what's being making the changes. So when you think about code generation, for instance, right, that is probably one of the #1 areas where we see value right now. But you have to have the right instrumentation in place for that, processes and workflows. I also see a lot of test scaffolding that's being implemented using AI tools. Product requirement summary, that's a no-brainer. A lot of product people, a lot of scrum masters are using that. And then if you think about where it breaks down, it really breaks down when teams treat AI as deterministic, and it's not. My background, as a data scientist, probabilistic systems is probably one of the reasons I got into machine learning and AI and data science years ago, because I like to understand, how do we predict something that is a little difficult to predict? If it's like the stock market, everybody wants to predict it, but it's not that easy. So those are the kind of systems or the kind of views that you want to use when you look at introducing AI tooling. And then also you have to think when you implement these systems, you have to architect it in such a way that it's routing to the right models, the costs are being controlled, and to get practical with that. What does that mean? We have a couple of clients where their developers would go and build agents, for instance, and they'll use API calls and they'll use the most expensive model, and it works great in the first phase, the prototype phase. But to scale that becomes really expensive if you pay per API call. So if you're going to look at how in your organization you want to make it reliable, you want to make it so that your cost is under control, you have to look at how do you route your API calls for these models. Some clients prefer internal because of privacy, so cost is not that big of a concern. So to kind of just summarize that, I would say you have to have instrumentation in place. You have to have bounded constraints, how AI is being used. It has to be reviewable. And then you also have to make sure that you have proper architecture in place for developers, for agents, and even for your tooling that you're using it for.
Yep. Okay. I'd like to also add, in addition to what Johan mentioned, there are a couple of other things that also you should probably keep in mind. You probably want to pick some kind of a narrow workflow with some kind of a measurable outcome. This way you can tie it to like a business KPI and not just trying to figure out things on the fly. Another thing is to have some kind of a evaluation when you're getting to some stage. Maybe you have some kind of a test set, maybe you have some kind of automation or regression that you want to do. You need to evaluate that as you get things done. There are a couple of other things that I could come up, but I know we're limited on time. But those are certainly important things that you need to keep track of for sure.
Just one thing to add, what Alex was saying, I want to emphasize it. It's super important. Is the right use cases. We've had a few clients ask us about where can they use tools most effectively, and if you look at code assisting, refactoring suggestions, those are great. Vibe coding for enterprise, we're not quite there yet. However, I do want to say we've kind of moved from a year ago, can AI do this, to can we trust when it does it now? So we've made that transition. So a year from now it might be different, but definitely start small with controlled use cases. That's very important point, Alex.
Awesome. Perhaps there's another question that we can go for.
Yeah. So Alex, I have one for you.
Yeah.
When you think like organizations, that you consult with, um, a lot of times there's these shadow organizations inside of the enterprise. You have like a shadow AI organization where accounting is using their own tools. They might be using OpenAI's ChatGPT or something like that. When you consult with these clients, how do you give them advice around shadow organizations? How do you deal with that?
So shadow organizations, goodness. Okay, there's several ways to deal with it, and the most important thing is to figure out how to do this without slowing the teams down. And essentially comes, in my opinion, into one principle. You make the safe path the easiest path, and you make the risky path extremely difficult to deal with. In some kind of an outsourced delivery model, right, where we are the outsourcing partner for a particular client, it means we need to have some kind of controls, and hopefully they're super lightweight, and they can be embedded in the tools that the engineering teams already use, like Visual Studio or whatever the case may be. Maybe some kind of language models that they may be using, and this is something that the client already accepts, and they only need to accept it one time. And that way, maybe some kind of automated evidence, to have governance in place, so that the stuff that's ready to be shipped is not something that needs a completely new model on how to do things. So that's one principle that I always go with. Keep the easy path, and make the risky path annoyingly difficult.
Yeah, I kind of think as you're talking through that, it's like how we moved from Napster to Spotify. They
Hmm.
made it so easy. You want to listen to music, you go to Apple Music or Spotify. So from my perspective, a lot of times, when we look at like data usage rights, you want to kind of lock down things where you explicitly forbid vendor training, on customer data and things like that. It is difficult to enforce if you don't have the right mechanisms in place to track it and monitor and all those kind of things. There's also, the IP. There's a lot of business information that leaks that goes into the cloud and nobody really knows where it is. So you're right. When we want to set up those kind of boundaries, we want to make sure that it's very easy. Give people training. That's number one. And then make sure they have the tooling. I think a lot of times where I see it fail is when people introduce these technologies without training. And they're like, here, let's just sprinkle some AI on the enterprise and it's going to magically do its thing. And it's the worst thing you can do is you need to have a plan to implement some kind of process and training. And a quick anecdotal example, we had a client last year. They wanted to introduce Copilot to their enterprise, but they have 40,000 people around the world. Too expensive to give everybody a license. So what we did is we basically took a sample from different departments of about 300 people, and we ran for 3 months basically like a prototype or a proof of concept period. We did surveys before, we did survey in the middle, and we did a survey at the end. To kind of get the baseline and how people are using these tools and all that. We also tracked usage, through logging and other measurements. And what we found was interesting. People that really accelerated using the tools were the ones that already knew how to use existing Office tools. Like, for instance, in Excel, if you didn't know how to do a pivot table before, you wouldn't know how to ask a language model to do a pivot table. Or if the language model explained or recommended that, you wouldn't know what the benefit is. So there's a base scaffolding of knowledge that you kind of need before you can even add these tools. Just adding the tools don't make you smarter. It's also true with custom agents. When we build these AI agents for clients, where it's custom, we're automating some kind of business process or something. A lot of times the data, just like every other machine learning problem, if the data doesn't exist to train the agent is not smart. And people assume that, but it's AI, it can figure it out. But I always tell people, we don't really write software when we write AI agents. We train it, and we train it with data. We train it with knowledge. So it's, it's very particular to that, that use case, just to make sure that when people introduce it, they also have all of the mechanisms in place around it.
those are
Is that
awesome points. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Johan, I also wanted to mention that the shadow AI, what
mm-hmm.
it usually shows up because our software engineers are trying to probably solve one of three problems. The first one is they want to get perhaps faster answers than some internal documents that they may have. Another one is that they want to have better code suggestions than whatever tools they use or whatever the other engineers can provide to them. And I think the last one is perhaps writing quicker than whatever templates that they use. I think the use of
Yeah.
AI, especially in IT development, it boils down to one of those three. So,
Yeah.
if the approval path that they need to go through feels slow, or maybe it's like restrictive, I think people will just find ways to get around it. And to fix that, it's not just like writing an email or writing a memo. There has to be some kind of an internal approved experience, and it's better than just random browser tabs that they need to use. So that's my take on those three.
Now, the one thing you kind of touching on that as well. Apart from the shadow organization, you also have, we talked about IP exposure, right? And the way that when we consult and the way we think about it is contractually, you want to treat model vendors just like any other critical infrastructure. There's usage rights, there's training and data retention controls that you have to have in place. There's incident disclosures, which is a big one. This is almost every week now we see with all these fast releasing features, these models go down. And if you have production systems relying on it, you need to know why. What's the incident? So that's important. And then auditability. If you don't have that track, there's no way that if your IP is actually protected or not. So it's just, I think it's nothing new. If you're a CTO, you've been looking at critical infrastructure in a certain lens forever, and this is just another factor that you're adding. And from the get-go, treat it exactly the same. It's critical infrastructure. So that's how I would look at the IP side of it. The other thing is also NIST came out with their generative AI profile categories. And it's really good reading. I'm not going to go through it. I don't know it by heart, but the basic premise is they have categories around data privacy, intellectual property, value chain integration, the kind of controls that you have to implement. So there's a lot of work that's been done around these, specifically around language models and generative AI specific things. So to me, that's a great reference point. NIST.
Mm-hmm. Yep. One thing I do also want to mention, I touched on it earlier, but I want to mention it again because it's super important, is whatever implementation the shadow IT is going to be doing, make sure that it doesn't slow down the team. I've seen this happen before where people invest in some tools and the tools want to use the engineers to go quickly, or rather the engineers want to use the tools to go quickly. What ends up happening is that it becomes impossible and they keep on having, running into issues or problems or whatnot. So the objective is to use the tools that they already have, just like when you mentioned, you have an Excel spreadsheet, you want to embed some AI into that. There's some training that they need to understand, like the pivot table that you mentioned. So same thing with an IDE. So you want to have some kind of AI integration within some IDE or some kind of chat environment, but that needs to work in a way that doesn't slow down the developer. The last thing we want to have is all of this hype that AI does it so fast, but then the developer takes so much longer to do it because they need to navigate through using the tools.
Yeah, and so what you're touching on is a big topic, and it's something it's worth discussing, which is the change management that needs to go along with these systems. And I think that's another neglected area. A lot of times, let's talk about just developers for a second. We've had clients that actually don't have Scrum Masters anymore. They changed the process. The 2-week sprint cycle is now a few days. So, they've retooled, but they also retooled their process and they did training to get their developers to that point. When you talk about custom development around AI and things like that, a couple of years ago, everybody's looking at these robots now that's coming out, the humanoid ones, right? But I've worked with robotics probably since 2017 with Boston Dynamics, the yellow dogs running around. And one of the moments that clarified it for me was when we were in a factory environment at a big beer manufacturing plant here in the United States. And after everybody got over the whole how cool the robots are, a couple of the guys that works on the floor came to us and said, "Hey, are these robots here to replace us?" And it kind of highlighted to me, we never did a good job explaining to them the value that the robot is bringing to their work environment. Instead, we thought, it's pretty cool. They'll embrace it like everybody else. So it's just being it robotics, being it, agentic AI, coding tools for developers. A lot of people have a fear, and they're thinking of this is replacing me. And my pivot would be, we're not there where it's replacing people yet, but it's replacing tasks, specific tasks that people do. And if all of the tasks that you're doing gets replaced, that basically replaces your job. I agree with that. And it's not happening as quickly as I sometimes think it would, but it is happening. And I think it's worth knowing where AI is good and where it's not good. And then also how to embrace that change that's going to come along with it. Companies are going to push forward. It's not like they're going to say, we're not using AI, we want to stay behind, because all of their competitors are using AI. And, to be competitive, to stay ahead, to hire the best people, you kind of have to step up and help with that. So we embrace that as a company as well. And our philosophy is, we train. If a client tells us we want to train our engineers to go and use these tools, absolutely, let's train them. If you want more bodies, we can do that too. But it's something that change management that goes along is super important.
Yep, totally agree with you, Johan.
Right. So I want to switch it a little bit. Talk about just how do we determine ROI and business value? So when you think about AI, and I'll kind of set the stage. If you're just doing a website and you're building a shopping cart and all those kind of things, you know what you're getting. When you build an AI model and you come to me, Alex, and you say, "Hey, Johan, I need it to be 99.9999999 precise." That's very difficult to determine how long it's going to take. Will we ever get there? We can get to maybe 90% accuracy, and that last 10%, cost us $2 billion. There's so many unknown factors. So we can do experiments. So our philosophy is always, let's attach some kind of ROI to the product. So when you're looking and you're talking to clients, you're looking at projects, what are some of the areas that you see there's ROI, that can come from using these tools or these approaches?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, the response to that is another question, which is which areas of business are going to be impacted by this implementation of AI, whether it's agents or other kinds of AI implementations. So for example, is it finance? Is it marketing? Is it software engineering? Because each one of those distinct components within a company have a completely different set of KPIs and different set of ROIs that would matter to them, that may be completely different than for other areas of the business. So for example, if it's for finance, we probably want to deal with, what kind of gross margin they're going to have. Maybe they want to deal with what kind of cost per shipped item. Maybe they want to figure out, is it faster after the AI implementation rather than before, regarding the total cycle time between, production and some kind of revenue work. There are lots of different areas, and I'm just talking about finance. Other areas of the company would look at their KPIs completely differently. But more importantly, the thing companies totally miss is determining what is the actual metric as it is today, rather than let's wait until AI is implemented and then start tracking. It's always more important to determine what are you doing now, because then how do you know if the implementation provided you any real value or any real ROI?
That is super important. That baseline And to me, I kind of, the way that I frame it up, I use 3 layers of ROI that, that we think about to kind of fit it, right? First is looking at like unit economics, where it's cost per outcome or cost to serve or marginal cost curves, things like that. Also, the second one would be the business lift, like, cycle time reduction. And I want to touch on that for a second. Let's say you have a call center and it takes 8 hours a day for a person to deal with 100 phone calls, right? And if you can shave the time for 100 phone calls to maybe 6 hours, 5 hours, that is a good ROI. But now you have an extra couple of hours that you can gain and you can increase that person's productivity. So, that business lift, a lot of times that is the sweet spot where people really want to focus on. But they're also jumping to, oh, let's eliminate a job, or let's eliminate 5 jobs and we use one person with 10 AI agents. We're not there yet. It
No,
might get, but we're not there yet. So it
that's right.
is good to kind of think the way that you're explaining is having the baseline first, because if we just have a project where we say, okay, we need to replace what people are doing today without knowing what they're doing, how they're doing it, it's very difficult to measure what's the uptake or what's the benefit.
Right.
The last one there, the way that I think about that bucket is just the risk reduction. And you think about, this is more in the security where we look at compliance, readiness, operational resilience. I want to give an example of that in a minute, but also like, breach probability exposure for cybersecurity. Those are all really good use cases. So usually unit economics, business lift, risk reduction are general buckets that I like to fit it in. So we did an agent for a client where they have these third-party APIs that that serves their platform. They just do scheduling, all kinds of stuff with it. And the agent, and this is a really good use for agents. People think about agents, and most use cases is just automation. This is actually a use case where I explained it because it shows what AI agents are, why it's different from just traditional RPA, where it's just robotic processing.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of monitoring the APIs to see if it's up or down, what it actually does, it uses its intelligence to see when the APIs go down or when they change. And when they change, it automatically writes the code to adapt to that new changed schema. And if there's no change in the data and they could map it, it just submits a PR, and a person, a team lead, gets a notice. There's a PR for you to review. This API broke. In the meantime, it queues. The agent just queues the processes that it couldn't, the API calls it couldn't process. And as soon as that PR gets released, it bundles and it sends everything through. That is really using an agent and its intelligence to kind of help you with, making sure that your systems stay up, that you're not, your cycle time to get bugs fixed are better. But more importantly, it's like having an employee that's 24/7 looking at API calls. And I'm talking about a couple of 100 API calls, right? And they're looking at each and every one. Look at the payload, look at the schema changes and everything. And if it breaks, fixes it, tells the boss, hey, boss, look at my work. And if the boss says it's good and it's tested, promote it. So it's just, we're getting to that point where those are the kind of things that brings value, where the intelligence actually serves. It's not just a nice, oh, we're going to add AI to this, overcomplicate it, and there's no benefit to it.
I just want to mention that, we have to keep ROI always in the back of our mind, especially as consultants, working for other clients. And I want to mention, if potential clients are on the call, we want to make sure that ROI is there because they're paying for this, and we want to keep that in the foreground, not just in the back of our mind. So there's got to be some captured value that's part of the ROI. Whether you're reducing the amount of labor, meaning there's some work that needs to be done. Now you don't have to do it anymore, or maybe you redeploy that work to something else that could be perhaps more billable, or developing other items that will generate more revenue. Those kinds of things. You mentioned about rework, and that's good because I think if we reduce the amount of rework because we have less tickets because the AI agent found an issue and then turned around and fixed it. These are all wonderful things because that, um, that's something that people had to manually do before through lots of efforts. So if an AI agent can do that kind of work, that's awesome, and the ROI is obviously more positive in that direction. But we also have to think about the risk. What is the risk? And I think that we need to worry about incidents that happen in production, right? How do we know that the stuff that's going out there is going to be production ready? How do we know that the security issues that we constantly hear about online, on LinkedIn and on the internet, whatever, that, oh, I produced some code and all of a sudden it failed all the security stuff. Security is a major factor, especially in enterprise environments. So that's something to obviously avoid. And any kind of penalties. I mean, think about this. Imagine a system that was developed partially with AI, and because of the code that's there, there was some kind of downtime. There could be some fatal implications from a contractual basis regarding that kind of stuff. So these are all
Exactly.
things that I keep in mind, when I'm talking with clients regarding, what is the actual ROI on this? I don't focus simply on, oh, we can do so much faster, so much better. We need less people. We need, that's all great, but you have to dig a little bit deeper and deal with some of these things that will really kick you if you do things in the wrong way.
That's right. So we're going to get to the questions, but there's one question that caught my eye that's actually relevant to what we were talking about. And it's asking, is there a framework that we can share? Is AI good to solve this problem or not? Whoever asked, Aileen, that's an awesome question. And it's interesting because it's as important to know that AI is not a good choice as it is to know it is a good choice. Because if you're going to apply AI to, and I'll give you a quick example. As a data scientist, one of the things that I learned, back in school, was to build curve fitting models like time series models, predictive analytics, things like that. And those models they're pretty well tested. They perform pretty well. One of my favorite algorithms ever is XGBoost. It's a boosted model, so it's got a lot of different models that contribute. And if you look at all of those models, they do a very good job, right? Now we're living in the age of language models, and everybody thinks that language models can solve every single problem out there. It's one of those things where they interact with it on ChatGPT or whatever, and they think, okay, it can solve it, not understanding behind the scenes how those models uses tools and other things, right? So now you do a proof of concept, and you use a language model to do, let's say, a time series, like the stock market or somebody's blood pressure or something. We have time scale, and you have something there. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to have to figure out very quickly what is the right way to solve the problem. It's not always language models, right? The second thing is you have to, as Alex was mentioning, make sure that you have some kind of ROI you can attach to that. So when you ask me if we have a framework, absolutely we have a framework. I'm going to quickly run through it. So there's 6 stages. The first 2 stages is the data and the business understanding. We usually do that in the beginning so that we get a really good understanding of what is the data quality, availability. Is it stored in a location we can access it easily, or is it all over the world in spreadsheets? So we have to understand the data. The next thing is we look at the algorithms. Now, you can most likely find a base algorithm today, open source algorithm that you can use, what we call transfer learning, to train that algorithm on your specific domain, meaning the data that you have. Just to give you a quick example, if you take a base model that can recognize cats and dogs with a bit of training, meaning new images that's labeled, you can probably have it recognize a ferret. So it's just, that's what we call transfer learning. So I don't have to start from scratch. Okay, so now you have a good understanding of the data, you have a good understanding of the models available. And if there's no model that exists, you'll find that out too. And it might cost you millions, if not billions, to go and create these models. I mean, like OpenAI and all these guys, they spend billions of dollars to train those models. So we identify that very early in those 6 phases. Then we sit down and we're like, all right, everybody involved, typically with our clients or whoever's in that small group of people, we look at what can we do in the proof of concept phase, which is usually 8 to 10 weeks. And we focus on that. What is feasible, right? Also, we look at what is the measure of success for the proof of concept. We most likely, very, very unlikely, will get to the 99% accuracy within 8 to 10 weeks. So I've gotten a lot of pushback from fellow data scientists, machine learning people, where they say, oh, you can't possibly do a POC in 8 to 10 weeks. I agree. If the goal is to get it to production ready, probably not. And I always say it's like a kid that's 2 years old. You just want to see that that kid can learn. You don't want to get it to a PhD level. It's a 2-year-old. You need to get it through all the stages to get it to PhD level. So as a 2-year-old, where can we expect the proof of concept to be, that 8 to 10 weeks within that time frame, given what we know now? So then we agree on what the measure is. If the measure is, let's see if we can shave off 1 hour out of an 8-hour shift, perfect. That's what we aim for. So we don't aim for precision, recall, or any of those measures. We look at what's the business value, what's the ROI that we can achieve. Then we go through the data transformation, the modeling phase. Then we look at the validation phase. Now, validation with AI, just very quick, the way that it works, and if you've studied in the United States, before you go to college, you do these SAT tests, and it helps you get into different colleges. You train, and they drill it into you, all of the work that you need to learn. And then when you take the test, you get different questions than what you studied on, but it's the same topics. And they do that so that they can test and see if you understand. It's basic how college and school and everything works, right? We do the same with models. If we have 100 examples of something we want to train a model with, we take out a test set. So let's say 20 examples, and we train the model on 80. And when it's done training on all 80, we then give it the 20 test samples, and we see how it performs on that. And that is the measure that we use to kind of see where that model is performing right now. It's not a guarantee it's going to perform like that in production, but it gives us an idea of where it is. Is it at 50%, like a coin flip, or is it at the 80, 90% level? So during that 8 to 10 weeks, that framework is how we validate, do you have the right data, enough data? Are there algorithms available out there to solve your problem? Is AI actually the right approach to solve the problem? And then we go through the process to see, is there potential, if we take this base model and we continue training it, to get it to a point where it can solve your business problem in production? So that process, I mean, it's a framework that we've developed over the years. So if you ask me if I can share it with you, absolutely. But that's as much as I'm going to tell you about it now. Send me a LinkedIn message or an email, and I'll go into detail about that.
Awesome, thanks. Hey, by the way, I just saw a message from Vagmi, and I apologize if I didn't pronounce it properly. And he's asking if I think that there will be a need for enterprise IT to support vibe-coded apps in-house. Would it make sense for an enterprise-hosted Replit or Lovable? Their users already probably doing it, but doing it dangerously. He feels that the shadow IT problem has become so much worse. I totally agree. I think that enterprise IT departments will definitely need to support vibe-coded applications that are written in-house, primarily because in many companies, business teams, meaning non-technical, non-programming departments, are already building some solutions using those and other platforms. And quite honestly, I think that risk profile is way worse than the classical shadow IT. So I'll give you an example, right? So you have identity issues, you have data control issues like secret scanning and things like that. You have deployment, you have dev, test, production, you have logging, rollbacks, audits. You have ownership models, who does backups, who does escalations, who does security. All of these kinds of things are enterprise ideas and enterprise functions that these vibe coding platforms just completely ignore, right? It's just code, and now it's in production. and who cares what happens afterwards, right? I've seen so many clients who call us and say, "Hey, we just lost a whole bunch of data. We don't know what happened. Can you help?" And that's a serious problem. So I think that if enterprises, I think if they don't provide some kind of a safe internal platform that they can use, these teams are going to continue to ship these kinds of applications. They're going to do it anyway, and they're going to have random credential problems. They're going to have unclear IP terms where something is being used potentially as a copy of something else, and there's probably going to be complete zero auditability. So I think we need to figure out how to do that at an enterprise level, and that's exactly how shadow IT gets much worse. So
Yeah.
hope I answered
So
your question.
I have a question for you. So me included, but I want to hear how you're doing it. We interview a lot of people, and over the years, I actually worked for Alex. He was my boss 15 years ago. So
Something
we
like that.
we've had a relationship going for a long time, and interviewing other people as well. How do you deal with people these days when you interview them remotely? And filter out people using AI, because it's becoming much more difficult to figure out in just even a face-to-face interview if they're watching some chat GPT or something. There's voice, I don't want to give it away, but there's ways where people are using AI
Yeah.
tools to get around the interview process. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I can't really reveal too much because once I reveal it, then people will know some of the some of the tactics that I use in order to
Yeah.
determine if someone's really cheating or not. So, as you know, Johan, we're in this business where we have to interview candidates who are going to ultimately work for our clients, and we need to make sure that they are really good at what they do and not just say that they are. I've had lots of examples where I was interviewing someone, and it turns out that the person who ended up being, that went on site with the client didn't even resemble the same person that I interviewed. So there's physical identification
Mm.
that would have to deal with. But you're asking more about how they potentially use AI and how can they be cheating. So you know, I do this on a weekly basis. I find someone that I have to interview, and I find out that they're not being very honest in how they're doing the interview. The
Mm.
one thing I can tell you is, in order for them to cheat, they really have to look at the screen, right? Because usually they're looking at an answer because they have to read it quickly, right? If someone has some kind of a headphone on and the answer is coming to them in their ear, they're not going to be able to repeat it very quickly because they have to first hear it. So
Mm.
they need to look at a screen and read what's on the screen. So one thing that I sometimes say is, look up at the ceiling for the next 10 minutes. You can still hear me, right, Mr. Candidate? And the candidate said, yeah, I can still hear you. Why don't you tell me, some of the pillars that you use, some of the technical pillars that you use in object-oriented programming. And, you and I both know that there are four of them. And unless the guy really knows what he's doing, he's going to start to wonder what's the answer to that question. And if he looks at the ceiling, he's not really going to be able to read the screen. So that's one example of how I use different non-traditional tactics to determine if someone is really cheating, whether it's with AI or without AI. Using AI is way easier to cheat these days because the AI engine can listen to what the person is being, what the candidate is hearing as far as what the question is. They can send it to ChatGPT very quickly. They can
Yeah.
see the answer within like 2 or 3 seconds, and the answer is 100% right. So that's
Yeah.
one tactic that I use. The other tactic that I use, again, these are things that most people should be doing on their own without listening to me telling them how. But I start digging into it to answers like, okay, so in your last position that you say you did blah blah blah, how did you do that? What exactly, what kind of issues did you face? And at least for now, ChatGPT doesn't know how to answer those kind of questions easily, or it starts to make up things because it needs to please the user. And that's when I get
And,
them, because they start telling me some things that they did, and I said, okay, so tell me more about that. And that's when it really, really breaks down. So yeah, so there are many other tactics that I use if I start to suspect that there's some kind of cheating going on, but I can't really tell you much more than that.
Sure. Yep, I think that's good. So we had one more topic that we wanted to touch on, but I see a lot of questions. So I think we're going to switch to the question and give people like a chance to just so we can make sure we cover that. So I'm going to look at this quickly from the top. Wendy, I'm vibe coding and I am vibe coding a fairly complex data analysis application, and I'm using a agentic model. I spoke with a founder who is allowing users to make suggestions, and an agent executes suggestions. Oh my goodness, I'll tell you about that, and changes to the application based on user request. I would like to do this as I release my MVP. All right, I'm going to tell you, Wendy, this is a topic, when Eeyore introduced me, one of the things that I do is I do angel investment. So I meet with a lot of founders, and that is where I see the most adoption with AI tools. One of my friends, he's got a company, they've had 4 million in funding in the last year, their first funding round, and they're doing awesome. They have a full-time employee on their team that reports when they have to stand up every week. That employee is Devin AI, and it reports. It's got a voice. They actually gave it a voice so that it can say what it worked on, what's the challenges, what it's going to work on next week. It's like a regular employee. Here's the challenge with having your customers, directly influence the code base. First of all, forget about code and AI and stuff like that. If you're building a product, you kind of have to have a vision of what it is that you want to build. You need to validate that there's a market, there's a go-to-market strategy. There's a lot of things that goes into the product pipeline, right? Now, if you allow your customers to inform that, they don't have that vision that you as a founder or somebody that's building a product has. So you have to be careful. Where I can see this in the future, and this is kind of the conversations I'm having with a lot of folks in the future, where this can go is when there's a bug that gets reported, like you have some kind of product out there, people log, a support ticket. That might be something like what I was telling you before, the example about the monitoring tool for APIs, where a bug gets fixed automatically, goes into the pipeline, and somebody reviews it, tests it, and it's good to go. A developer doesn't really have to go and do the coding. That would be a way that I would use it, but not for new features or anything like that, just because not of the technology, but you're letting people that don't have your interest in mind, build your product. And I don't think that's a good way to go with that. Alex, do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I do. One of the things that she mentioned is, how do I track what the agent is doing, right? I think there are 3 ways that I can think of on how to track it. And we have to look at these kind of agents as maybe like a junior level engineer. So if you have a junior level engineer, what would you want them to do as the team lead or the senior engineer, that you would tell them how you want them to, how do you want them to do things so you can track their progress? The first thing I think about is all the different telemetries, all the different production telemetries, like a log store, alerts, things like that. The second thing I think about is whatever changes they need to make, it needs to go through some kind of a pipeline, and more preferably some kind of a controlled pipeline. So things like, you need to make sure it's tested. You need to make sure you use lint, for example. You need to do a security scan. You need to have all the different artifacts like your PR links and all the other stuff. These are things that a junior engineer must do when it comes to, for auditing purposes. So why would you not ask the AI agent to do the exact same thing? And last but not least is, for every run of the code, make sure you have a full trace of it. So you have your, whatever files that got changed, whatever files got patched, what every tool is using for input, for output, all that kind of stuff. So at the end of the day, I think it was, what was her name that asked the question? Wendy. So hopefully I've answered at least the part of the question that I think Johan did an excellent job on the first part. That's why I wanted to mention on the the tracking part.
So the next one, and I know we have like a little bit, we have about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get through everybody's question, is critical points for AI governance for big enterprises. I can quickly handle that one. So when you look at MS Copilot and rolling that out, they're coming with a lot of best practices already bundled. That's one of the benefits of using Copilot with Microsoft. You don't have to think through all the SOC 2 compliance, all the other things that you would typically have to do if you're using some kind of external tool, like for instance, Claude Desktop in your enterprise. You have to still make sure that there's some controls in place that you don't get out of the box like you do with Copilot. So when it comes to best practices, there is definitely best practices that we follow when we work with clients on different tools, not just Copilot or MS Copilot. I don't want to go into, it's going to be too long, but to answer your question very quickly, improving productivity for people, that's not the goal. Just to be clear, when we give tools to people, the goal is not to necessarily say you need to improve productivity. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, because why then use the tools? It is to enable that person to figure out how to use those tools for their own benefit, meaning it could be that their focus is productivity, but it could also be that their focus is quality. Alex mentioned earlier in the conversation about finance and some of the agents around finance. And there, it's not as much about productivity as it is about accuracy, traceability, and a lot of other things. So it all comes down to productivity is one measure. It's not the only measure. All right. The next question, I think, Alex, you already kind of touched on this one about the lovable for the enterprise, things like that. One thing I did want to add there is where I see those internal tools really finding value is where there's product owners involved. The typical workflow for a product owner is to go to some kind of designer. The designer goes to Figma. They do a design. It goes back and forth for weeks. And then finally, there's a whole bunch of Figma designs. Now you have to go to a developer with the Figma designs and say, okay, implement this. And now the developer has to think about it. You can bypass that whole workflow by getting the product owner in the right tool set. And Replit and Lovable are, I want to say it's consumer products. I don't think of it as enterprise products. I know people might disagree with me. What we're doing is when somebody wants that kind of workflow, we introduce Cursor and Claude. Those are really good tools to kind of prototype quickly. And if you have a design system, like a proper design system for Next.js or React or whatever, you can pull that design system into your context and have your product owner design what they want the UI to look like. And it's all mocked up. So that, it's not eliminating the designer totally, because they still do the designs, but instead of them building each and every iteration, they get into building the components that goes into the design system. The product owner is the one that assembles it, and it's starting code that a developer can start working with day one. So just want to mention that. Next question, Aileen Chavez. Is there a framework you can share? I think we touched that one, so I'm going to skip it. Sobia, you mentioned that this tool will replace tasks and may eventually replace developers. Will there be a need for human involvement to review and validate? Okay, so that question today, the answer is yes. There's the human in the loop. We would not recommend anybody, even if you're vibe coding, push code into production without a human reviewing it. That could change. It could change in the next year. I don't know. So where this is going is definitely development is one of those skill sets where the language that me and Alex, when we learned to program, is changing. It's going to English. So if you think about what language developers are going to code in, it's going to be English or Spanish or whatever language you're speaking that gets translated into C++, C#, Python, all these other programming languages, maybe assembly, I don't know. So my point with that is, yes, there's for now humans in the loop. There will be use cases where there won't be in the future. For the most part, if you're going to continue programming, your language, just like it changed from assembly to C to C++ to C# to Python, it's now changing into English or whatever other human language. What do you think, Alex?
No, I completely agree, right? And a lot of folks who are in the computer science world, they're kind of concerned because they went to school, they've done their degrees just like I did, just like you did, and now we're trying to figure out how to essentially ditch all that in favor of a new paradigm, which in some cases is scary, in other cases is quite interesting and very exciting because you can do a lot more without having to worry about the actual syntax of the language itself. I do see a question that I just popped up on my screen regarding something that I was talking about earlier, which is the cheating thing. And
Yeah.
Benjamin, he asked this question a few minutes ago. At what point does AI not become cheating and actually becomes a requirement? So I think there are three things here to think about. The first one is if the AI is used to replace the learning, or bypass the rules, right? So for example, you have your closed book exam, you have your take home assignments, and it forbids using that stuff. If you have plagiarism going on, that is obviously cheating, right? So it needs to be from your brain, not from an AI tool. However, if the AI tool is used inside of some kind of a process, and that process allows the company to use AI, especially when the results are validated and owned by the person that's shipping that code base, then it's not cheating, right? So if the organization's delivery, if the cost, or maybe some kind of a risk target, if those things cannot realistically be met without any kind of AI assistance, it becomes a requirement. And in some cases, it is more than a requirement. You can't get it done without it. We just talked with a client the other day, and their requirement based on rules that they had to sign, contracts that they had to sign, because of security, because of governance, because of HIPAA regulations, because of PII, use of LLMs is strictly prohibited because of the nature of the data and the nature of the content. So it really all depends on the cheating aspect. But when I was talking about cheating is more on the interview side. But yeah, there are some places in technology where you can't use it for whatever reason. And in some cases, please use it because it will enhance the capability of the developer to produce perhaps better quality output as a result of AI assisting them rather than doing all the work.
So Alex, I'll give one tip away. So when we do our interviews,
Go ahead.
if a client's asking us specifically, and Benjamin, this is to your point, if they're asking to have candidates that are familiar with using AI tools, the interview itself, what I do is I would let them bring up a screen. We have a test application, a web application with an API, and I ask them to prompt the tool to write an MCP layer that has OAuth authentication. And what I do is I look at their prompt writing skills. Traditionally, I would have looked at their coding skills. I don't have to do that too much anymore if they know how to use AI tools. So I look at how do they prompt? Do they think about the implications of security? I look at when they test it locally, do they ask the model to differentiate between local host versus a deployed host? Because when you do OAuth, you need the redirect API. So I'm testing their knowledge, not by writing code, by prompting. And that's one. That's the only tip I'm going to give around that. But we've adapted how we interview based on that, depending if those tools are needed. And who knows, maybe that becomes the standard, how we interview in the future. But it is something, we still test knowledge. And that's really what it's about. Like Alex, we've changed languages so many times. And that's why I tell people it's just another language. It's one that I happen to speak. I don't speak in SQL. I don't speak in C#. So it's a language that I speak, but it doesn't mean that the critical thinking and the skill set and how do you deploy this at scale in Amazon, all those things aren't important. So there's still ways to test it.
Let me jump in here because your guys just unstoppable. We have like a dozen questions more. I just paste the link to our CTO community in our chat. I will send you all materials and the video like in a few days. I want to say thank you to our speakers because it was truly amazing discussion. It was so active. Most of webinars what I have seen, they're sometimes could be boring, but not this 100%. And I want to say thank you to everyone who joined and asked so thoughtful questions. Just as I mentioned, recording will be sent to your email, and thank you. See you on the next sessions.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Alex,
Thank you for coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.